want to talk today about design patterns in software development and honestly why they are important and also very necessary, especially as we're introducing more AI tooling into our workflows as devs. I think it's even more critical that we stick to a lot of well-defined software design patterns that have been laid out for us over the past however many decades prior to before a lot of us got even into this career. And I see a lot of posts pop up that essentially claim that it's good to you know write these minimal APIs that have one file that do all your stuff. So in the .NET world, a minimal API is basically where you can write your endpoints in the program.cs file using the minimal hosting model and not have to actually make explicit controllers to have your routing. And then people take it a step further to say that you can just shove all your service and your repository logic inside of these endpoints to make them, to make your whole entire solution one file. And these posts claim that that is cleaner. They claim that that is a better approach because it's easier to read. But whatever you think about that, I think a lot of those posts are just designed to grab people's attention that have not been in this career for a while and have not encountered the situation where the original spec to which you were programming something changes and you inevitably have to go back and alter or enhance code that you wrote. And if you write code in such a way where, for example, it's one file, everything's shoved in there, it's not going to make it testable. It's not going to make it extensible. It's not going to make anything you write modular because everything is just going to be in this crammed file. And it's just not going to be clean. It might start out clean and it might appear to be clean, when you first begin because you're like, oh, this thing's on one file. Boom, I did it in 10 lines. That might be true in the beginning. But like anything we do, it's never finished, right? It's like writing code is no different than like writing a book or an essay. You never think that you're done. You always can go back and edit. You always can go back and revise, and that's always what happens with code. Any code that you write, it's you have to assume that at some point in the future you're going to come back and work on that same bit of code at some point in time. And so these patterns have been designed with that in mind. So to circumvent all of those in the name of code cleanliness somehow that makes for a good social media post, I just think is not a wise approach to development. And I think what's going to happen is that a lot of people are going to see those posts who maybe don't know any better and then adopt that style of programming and then have AI just bolster their beliefs about those particular coding styles. And I think until people encounter the problem of oh wait, how do I test this? How do I add on to this? How do I add this code into this single line minimal API? How do I unit test this? Until people encounter and ask those questions for themselves, I just don't think that this is going to change because these posts get way too much traction and attention on social media, and it kind of goes into a video we made in the past where I was kind of harking on the fact that just because you can write something on one line doesn't mean you should. It's no different than just because you can include everything in one file and have it, run your entire solution doesn't mean you should. And people like to argue that it adds extra work to break things out into a controller, into, a service and repository. And that is true. It takes, a couple extra clicks to do that. But it sets you up to not only unit tests better, but it sets you up to take advantage of patterns that have been designed for your help, like dependency injection, and so many others that we just take for granted because people have already kind of solved the problem. And it's like we're trying to reintroduce the problem because we don't know we don't know about it. So it just seems really odd to me. So my thing is that like I'm not saying that we should only go by the patterns that have been laid out, whether that's in the design patterns book, whether that's basic things like um, dependency injection, repository patterns, singletons, decorators. I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about just those. I'm talking about I don't think we shouldn't just hold ourselves obviously to only use those patterns. If you find a better way to do something, if you find a like a new pattern that can be implemented, then I experiment with it and try it out and get feedback on it and see what the community thinks. But you can't just throw all the patterns out and just say we're going to do it in one file, because that's not really how this like works. Like, yeah, in essence it might create a working something something might work, but like your solution. But what's the long-term maintainability of that? What's the long-term readability of that? And this is the biggest thing, right? Like, coding a lot of times is the logic is not the difficult part. The difficult part is honestly making the thing readable, because if you can't read it, what good does it do? You know what I mean? Like, I see people advocating for short variables, you know, acronyms, all these crazy things. Like, yeah, that's great for the person writing the code, but what about like years down the road when there's like an entirely new team, or you just happen to revisit the code and then you just forget what you wrote or what it means. Whereas if you just were, a little bit more verbose about it, a little bit more descriptive in your wording, in your language, it would have fixed the problem. And this really gets back to the idea of one of my favorite styles of programming, and that's railway oriented programming, where you basically set up your code to operate in this pipeline, where if you ever derail, then it kind of goes on like this new like error handling track. But you can basically plug things into your railway and have it, your data flow just continue to work in essence. This kind of gets into functional programming, but it makes you think more of, how am I naming methods? How am I chaining them together? What is the common contract that unifies all my methods together? What's that object that's going to be passed through? What's that going to be called? What are the properties going to be called? And it just creates for, I think, a really tight, a really good way to program that's, I think, maintainable, because it makes you think about that stuff a little bit more. Whereas if you just name things, var x, or do for loops with variables, just one character long, that's not really going to help you make a system that's maintainable. And that's really what it's all about: is how do we create a maintainable system that everybody understands, and that is clear in its intentions, because capturing intent is truly one of the more difficult parts of this job. Because it's one thing to write something, but it's another thing to capture, okay, what is the actual intent of what I'm like trying to write? Because sometimes a little bit gets lost in translation, right? If I write a method that I intend for it to do something, but the logic may say a little bit otherwise, I need to capture, like, okay, what am I intending this to do? What's like what's like the successful route of this method? Like, what, when this is performing as I would think, what am I intending it to do, and what is the logic saying? That to me is difficult, but it takes practice. It's like anything. It's a skill that we just have to, continually, get better at. And yeah, so when I see things trying to say that we need to just cram everything in one line or one file, I just want to know why. What's the benefit, right? What's the true benefit? I don't know. So let me know what y'all think, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.